The sky turned black in minutes, and the wind came like a charging beast. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the bones. At the edge of the Carter property, the old wooden bridge flexed, moaned, and gave way with a violent snap. A black sedan plunged into the churning water below. Daniel Moran did not look around for help or permission. He tossed his jacket aside and sprinted toward the riverbank, his instincts moving faster than thought. The current was swollen, cold, and blind, swallowing the vehicle in seconds. He dove headfirst into the chaos, cutting through the murk the way a soldier cuts through smoke on a battlefield. On shore, 8-year-old Evan stood frozen until a gleam of metal washed toward him. He stumbled forward and seized it with both arms, a heavy briefcase, soaked, locked, important, and whatever it held had just arrived in their lives like a lightning strike. The Moran estate sat on rolling pasture land that looked peaceful from a distance, but everyone who lived there knew silence had a pulse. The family had gathered for a celebration, yet the weight in the air felt heavier than the clouds before the storm. Every relative arrived with the same tight smile, brittle and staged, like actors reading lines from a script no one believed. Reunion was printed on the invitations, but what lingered was absence, not return. Rudy tried to keep the conversation loud and easy, as if noise could drown grief. Mara arranged plates with shaking hands, pretending nerves were busyness. Even Victor smiled without warmth, glancing around like a man checking for witnesses, not cousins. The lodge smelled like pine wood and grilled meat, but underneath it lived something colder, a truth buried deeper than stone. Hannah was the reason no one raised a glass. She had been the bright one, the sister who always showed up. Then she became a cautionary tale, spoken in half sentences and broken pauses. Respiratory failure was the tidy version. Daniel had stood in the hospital watching her fade, helpless in a way the battlefield never taught him. He had restarted fading hearts, yet he could not stop the poison masquerading as medicine. The pharmacy called it relief, but her body called it surrender. The company that made it called it margin. Daniel called it murder, written in small print. He never said that aloud, not to the sheriff, not to the hospital board, not even to Mara. Some grief lives underwater, and some suspicions grow teeth before anyone sees them. At family dinners, no one mentioned lawsuit or accountability. They tiptoed around the truth the way people circle a graveyard at night, afraid something might answer. Mara still set a place for Hannah the first year, then stopped. But her eyes still drifted toward that empty corner like a reflex. Rudy cracked jokes, but his laughter always ended too soon. The house remembered even when the mouths pretended. Victor's silence was sharper than grief. He talked about ambition, never history. His eyes flickered whenever Hannah's name surfaced. Daniel noticed the cufflinks, the new car, the luxury that did not fit a junior counsel salary. He did not confront him then, but the question hardened inside him like ice. Daniel carried his doubts like a packed kit, waiting for the moment they became necessary. He had found fragments and odd receipts, nothing that proved anything. Yet the pattern was there. Hannah did not die by chance. Someone profited. Someone buried the evidence. Someone hoped time would finish the cleanup. So when the family gathered that afternoon and thunder thickened the sky, the mood was not festival, it was pressure building in a locked room. Even before the bridge collapsed, Daniel felt the past pushing toward them like a storm front looking for a breach. Fate was circling, patient and deliberate, and the moment a drowning stranger arrived on his land carrying secrets sealed in steel, Daniel understood the story was coming back for witness. He had lived with that feeling for years, the sense that someone higher up was listening. Grief became vigilance. He knew a cover-up when he saw one. The uniform taught triage, loss taught motive. That gathering was never just reunion. It was a sentence waiting for its last word. Mara kept checking the driveway. Rudy stayed close to the grill. Victor lingered near the exits. And Daniel felt the air tighten before detonation. He knew a reckoning was coming. He did not know it would arrive in a red gown sinking in river water. The farmstead seemed to breathe with them, walls holding echoes. Every footstep sounded like memory. Even sunlight through windows looked dimmed, as if the house itself expected a visitor history had not finished with. Daniel felt watched not by people but consequence. Some ending circle, The room was warm from the fire, but the tension inside felt colder than the rain still pounding the roof. Vivian Kingsley lay on the sofa in borrowed flannel, hair damp, skin pale, breathing steady but watchful. She did not look like a rescued guest. She looked like someone waiting for the next strike. Her gaze did not drift around the room. It calculated. She tracked exits, measured distance, studied the silence like a threat disguised as comfort. Daniel recognized that vigilance. It belonged to people who knew danger did not stop just because breath returned. She was not listening to her heartbeat. She was listening for engines, tires, the sound of pursuit. A drowning victim feared water. Vivian feared the door. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but controlled. She asked for water and then asked for the briefcase. Not who saved her, not where she was. Evidence first, survival second. That told Daniel he had not pulled a bystander from the river. He had pulled a fight to his doorstep. "It is safe," he said, though he understood safe meant temporary. She closed her eyes for a moment as if weighing how much of her story to risk. Then she steadied herself and opened them again with resolve that looked older than her face. "My name is Vivian Kingsley." The syllables shifted the air. Daniel did not gasp, but the recognition landed behind his sternum like a slow blade. Kingsley Biotech was not an abstract villain now. It had a daughter, and she was sitting in his lodge asking about evidence that should never have existed. "You know the name," she said softly. He nodded once. He had seen it on pill bottles, lawsuits, obituaries, and the death certificate that still lived in his drawer like a wound that never completed healing. "I am not here to defend them," she continued, her voice roughened. "I am here because I am trying to tear the foundation out from under them before they bury more families." The wind rattled the shutters like punctuation. Daniel leaned forward, still wary but listening. Vivian drew a long breath. "I have documents. Internal warnings, buried for profit. Safety reports rewritten to protect image. A third-party supplier flooding rural clinics with counterfeit product. My father signed off on everything. The legal department sealed the fallout. They thought no one inside would ever choose conscience." She looked toward the rain-streaked window. "They discovered what I was collecting. They watched me for months. When I left tonight, someone followed. That crash was not coincidence. It was cleanup." Daniel felt a grim clarity settle through his veins. This was not corporate neglect. It was curation. It was the removal of liability by eliminating the witness who carried proof. "And the briefcase," he said. "It holds the chain of proof. Enough to bring charges that will stick. Enough to expose them in court where silence cannot be purchased." She hesitated. "Your sister was not a tragic exception. She was predicted loss. They call it tolerable risk." The words landed like gravel in still water. Daniel looked at the fire because looking at her too long would show more than anger. Vivian watched him with something fragile hiding under steel. "If I reach the prosecutor alive, I can detonate the shield they built," she said. "If I do not, they will bury me twice, once in public narrative, once in the river." Thunder cracked again. Daniel ran a hand down his face, absorbing the sum of what had stepped over his threshold. Vivian was not fleeing. She was defecting. And defection drew hunters. "You were never supposed to know this story existed," she said, almost to herself. Daniel did not blink. "I have been living inside its fallout for 3 years." For the first time, her expression shifted from guarded to human pain. "Then you already understand why I cannot turn back." The house creaked under the wind like an old witness clearing its throat. Daniel saw the crossroads tightening around them. Keep her alive, and he joined the war she carried. Turn her away, and she vanished into the same machinery that erased Hannah. "You came here because the truth refused to drown," he said. Vivian held his gaze. "I came here because someone has to drag it into daylight before the darkness finishes the cleanup." She shifted upright slowly, recovering strength while never lowering vigilance. Her hands trembled only once, more from fury than frailty. And Daniel understood she was not asking for rescue now. She was asking for witness. Outside, the storm eased, but the danger thickened like fog that did not need thunder to be lethal. Vivian did not look away. She looked ready. A reckoning waited at the door. For them, the fire in the lodge burned hot, But Daniel worked with the cool precision of a battlefield medic. He stripped off the soaked fabric, wrapped Vivian in blankets, and checked her pulse with the rhythm he had once used under artillery sky. Her skin was pallid and cold, but her vital signs hovered inside a narrow band of salvage. He positioned her near the hearth, rubbing her arms to push warmth back into numb tissue. Outside, the storm battered the valley like a siege. He had reversed hypothermia before, but never with adrenaline running this cold. He watched her breathing settle, slow but stubborn. Shock had not stolen her will. It had forged it. The softness of near drowning clung only to her body, not her eyes. When her lashes flickered, he saw calculation waiting there, not confusion. Most survivors waited for safety. She waited for pursuit. Daniel draped another blanket across her shoulders, then lifted the coat peeled from her earlier. The fabric was heavy with river silt. He meant only to angle it toward the fire until a small lapel pin caught the glow. He turned it between his fingers. The crest was unmistakable, Kingsley Biotech, a name he had seen in pharmacy paperwork and in every page of grief tied to Hannah. The world did not tilt. It locked into focus. The woman on his couch was born of the same empire that had buried his sister behind dosage labels. His pulse did not race. It compressed, like weight on tempered glass. Rage did not erupt. Resolve aligned. He had not rescued coincidence. Something had been delivered. He set the coat aside. A medic shields life. A brother remembers the dead. The two truths pressed against each other in his chest until breath felt like friction. The fire snapped in the grate, sparks leaping upward like small confessions trying to escape. Vivian stirred. Her lips parted, drawing a slow breath as awareness surfaced. He checked her temperature again and guided her through shallow inhalation. Method without hesitation. But the meaning behind it had changed. She was not merely alive. She was a doorway into a secret he had hunted without map or witness. He saw the faint tremor at her jawline, not the weakness of shock, but the bracing of someone re-entering danger. When she focused on him, clarity returned with alarming precision. She tracked him the way trained eyes track escape or ambush. She understood she was breathing, but not yet safe. Her grip on the blanket tightened. "You are stable," Daniel said. "Not secure," she replied. "For the moment," he answered. Their silence held weight. Recognition lived inside it. Neither of them looked away because neither of them believed the pause would last. "You saw the crest," she said. "I did." A long breath moved through her, steady enough to reveal resolve. She had made peace with risk long before the river found her. What rattled her was not mortality, but failure. The hunted shape of her demeanor told him she was not fleeing scandal. She was fleeing erasure. Daniel rose, walked to the windows, and checked the tree line. Wind sent needles sweeping across the glass like quiet code. He was no longer thinking as a host. He was thinking as a shield. The storm outside was only weather. The storm coming for her would be pursuit with strategy and payroll. He returned to the hearth and placed a kettle near the coals, then sat again. Firelight sketched her features in bronze and shadow. The truth waiting behind her eyes carried voltage. She was not a rescued stranger. She was the hinge of a buried story. Outside, thunder rolled across the timberline like a warning crawling closer. Inside, the air thickened with inevitability. The briefcase sat near the wall, mute but heavy with consequence, as if waiting for its moment to speak. Daniel knew revelation stood just ahead, and that once the first word left her mouth, nothing would return to what it had been before. A threshold was forming in the room, invisible but unmistakable, and every heartbeat carried them closer to crossing it. He could feel it in the stillness, a shift in the atmosphere like the moment before a breach. The lodge no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a line in the sand. Vivian watched him with the quiet comprehension of someone who had crossed too many thresholds to mistake mercy for safety. She was not asking for rescue anymore. She was presenting a crossroads. Outside, the night pressed closer, carrying the distant echo of engines and intention. Trouble was not lost, it was inbound. He could feel it in the stillness, a shift in the atmosphere like the moment before a breach. The lodge no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a line in the sand. Vivian watched him with the quiet comprehension of someone who had crossed too many thresholds to mistake mercy for safety. She was not asking for rescue anymore. She was presenting a crossroads. Outside, the night pressed closer, carrying the distant echo of engines and intention. Trouble was not lost. It was inbound. Daniel waited until the storm outside had abated before speaking, because what was coming was no longer physical relief, but a confrontation with the truth. Vivian sat against the fireplace, wrapped in the blanket that had kept her alive, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. This was no longer a place of treatment. This was a place where confessions were about to be unlocked. Her hands did not shake. Her eyes did not seek comfort. They had the courage of someone who knew that if she did not speak now, there would be no second chance. She began to tell, not out of hesitation, but because of the weight of the secret. The chain of counterfeit drugs did not begin in a fancy conference room. It was conceived in underground factories, approved through intermediaries so that if traced, it could still be denied. Records were clean on the surface, and profits flowed through dark channels below. Drugs crept into Montana under the guise of rural health aid. Each link appeared like a smoldering map of guilt. Daniel didn't blink. Every word she said matched a suspicion he'd harbored for 3 years without ever having any proof. The realization didn't come as a shock. It came as a final opening. Vivian continued. The safety warning reports were deleted. The audit files were buried. The person who signed the data destruction order wasn't a stranger, not a distant director. It was a name that was shared by blood. She didn't need to say it out loud. Daniel understood with a glance. Victor. Betrayal doesn't explode. It drains trust. A cousin who wore the cloak of false loyalty had helped bury Hannah's death under layers of legalese. A rage welled up in Daniel that wasn't fiery, but solid as metal. Vivian waited for the accusation, but he only answered quietly. Keep her alive first, the truth later. It wasn't a surrender. It was a strategy. He understood. If she died, the whole case would die with her. If she lived, the empire would pay. She told of the accountant who risked his career to give her the evidence, of the night she broke into the office to photograph the sealed cash register, of the moment she realized this wasn't a mistake. This was a purposeful machine. Daniel could feel the hunt already closing in. When Victor discovered she was alive, they wouldn't come to negotiate. He looked through the glass. The dark shadows of the forest seemed to be listening. Let her breathe, he said. Justice will take care of itself. Vivian nodded. An alliance was forged, not by signature, but by danger. The sky outside was no longer stormy. The real storm is now the awakened truth. Morning had not yet broken when the knock came. It was not frantic, it was precise. The kind used by men who arrived expecting obedience. Daniel opened the door halfway, enough to block the threshold with his body. 3 men stood on the porch, rain sheening their coats. The one in front wore the expression of someone accustomed to giving orders and erasing consequences. Mr. Moran, he said smoothly. Derek Pike, head of corporate security for Kingsley Biotech. I am here for company property that was recovered from the river. A briefcase. Return it now and we will be on our way. Daniel did not move. There is an ongoing incident. Until law enforcement clears it, nothing leaves this house. Pike's smile looked professional, not polite. You misunderstand. This is not negotiation. The briefcase contains proprietary material that belongs to Kingsley Biotech. Its retrieval is mandated under corporate statute. Full. What you are calling corporate statute, Daniel replied, is evidence in a potential criminal investigation. That puts it under jurisdictional hold. The air thickened. Pike stepped closer, lowering his voice. You are a mechanic and a former medic. You do not understand the liabilities you are interfering with. I understand leverage, Daniel said. Movement flickered behind Pike. One of his men shifted his coat just enough for Daniel to glimpse the outline of a holstered weapon. Not presentation. Warning. Pike leaned in. Bring me the case and this ends quietly. Before Daniel answered, he pressed a small radio transmitter clipped beneath his sleeve. A signal skipped into the hills. Sheriff is on his way, he said calmly. You are not taking anything from this property without a badge and a warrant. The first crack in Pike's mask appeared. Not anger, but recalculation. He straightened his shoulders. We will wait nearby, he said. Daniel watched them retreat down the path to their SUV, positioning themselves just past the tree line where engines could idle out of sight. Not leaving. Staging. Minutes later, gravel crunched behind him. Sheriff Cole Brennan stepped out of his truck, scanning the ridgeline like a man who had already caught the scent of a hunt. "You called early," Brennan muttered. Daniel nodded. "They are not here to negotiate. They are here to erase." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Then it stays right here until I lock a chain of custody around it." The wind pushed cold air through the pine boughs. Not arrival, encirclement. Danger was no longer coming. It had taken position. The road into the timberline was unmarked and half swallowed by pine needles. The kind of path meant for memory, not strangers. Sheriff Cole drove ahead and Daniel followed with Vivian in the passenger seat and Evan curled in the back, clutching the metal briefcase as if it were a lifeline. They climbed higher until the forest closed behind them like a locking door. The cabin sat in a clearing cut from rock and thick cedar. No power lines, no neighbors, no vantage except the mountains themselves. Cole stepped out first, scanning the ridges before unlocking the heavy door. "This place is off record," he said quietly. "Nobody finds it unless I want them to." Inside, the air smelled of pine resin and cold iron. Vivian lowered herself beside the fire pit where Daniel had already started a flame. Her breathing was steady, but her eyes stayed alert, as if danger could shape-shift through wood grain. When Evan set the briefcase beside her, she paused. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, warped by time and water damage. "This was supposed to reach her," she whispered. Daniel took the envelope. Hannah's name was written across the front in clean pen strokes. The postmark dated 2 weeks before she died. He opened the letter with careful fingers. Inside, the handwriting was gentle, apologetic, full of intent to help, not silence. Vivian had tried once before to break the machine from within. Someone had intercepted her and buried both her warning and his sister. The pieces did not just align, they fused. Hidden factories, forged supply chains, the legal arm weaponized to erase casualties, and a Kingsley heir who had almost escaped her own conscience too late. The conspiracy was not rumor, it had architecture. Vivian looked at him, voice low but unwavering. "I thought I was exposing corruption. I did not realize I was stepping into a family vault built on secrecy." Daniel folded the letter and set it gently on the table. "Now it is proof?" Across the room, Evan sat with his notebook open, sketching the route they took, the cabin layout, the men in dark coats from earlier. He wrote times, details, posture, license fragments. He was not frightened. He was recording. A third pair of eyes, silent but invaluable. Cole closed the shutters and checked the rifle rack. "They will come again," he said, "but not while we are blind." For the first time since the river, Vivian's shoulders lowered, not in relief, in readiness. This was no longer flight. It was positioning. They left the cabin before sunrise, moving along logging roads that did not appear on any public map. Sheriff Cole led the way in his patrol truck while Daniel followed at a distance to avoid creating a target column. The forest wrapped around them like a moving shield. But everyone in the vehicles understood the illusion. They were not hidden. They were simply ahead of pursuit for the moment. Vivian sat upright in the passenger seat with the briefcase secured at her feet. Her voice stayed low but decisive as she instructed Daniel which encrypted number to call once they reached range. "Assistant U.S. Attorney Marlene Vega," she said. "She is the only one inside the system who is already looking for cracks." Daniel registered the name. Not rumor. Leverage. When they reached the ridge where signal returned, Vivian relayed a coded message. Vega picked up within seconds. The conversation was short, clinical, and irreversible. A meeting would be arranged in Helena, but there would be cameras. Vivian insisted on it. "Secrecy is where they win," she said. "Visibility is the one shield they cannot bury." Not long after the call ended, news caught up to them. Pike had filed an emergency petition on behalf of Kingsley Biotech claiming Vivian was mentally unfit and had abducted corporate property, a competency motion, wrapped in manufactured concern, designed to strip her of legal standing before she reached a courtroom. Daniel felt his grip on the wheel tighten. "They are trying to erase you before you can speak." Vivian nodded once, calm, not surprised. "If they cannot silence evidence, they will discredit the witness. It is the oldest weapon." Cole's voice came through the convoy radio. "This just went federal in every sense. Once we hit Helena, eyes go everywhere. After that, they do not get to operate in the dark." Vivian's gaze fixed ahead, jaw steady. Then we reached daylight. Helena appeared on the horizon like a threshold, not a destination. Between pursuit and disclosure, there was no neutral ground left. Either the briefcase reached Vega's hands under public scrutiny, or the Empire reclaimed its scapegoat. They descended out of the timberline and onto open highway. No more cover, only direction. Daniel glanced at her. "Once this is public, you cannot go back." "I am not trying to go back," she said. "I am trying to break through." The city lights grew closer. The trap was already waiting for them. But so was the witness stand. Vivian did not shrink from it. She steered toward exposure on purpose. The courthouse steps were a barricade of cameras and microphones when Daniel escorted Vivian through the crowd. Reporters shouted her name, flashing bulbs turning the morning into a strobe of accusation. Victor waited at the entrance with corporate lawyers, brandishing a petition demanding the briefcase be seized as stolen property. For a moment the crowd believed him. Then the doors opened and Assistant U.S. Attorney Marlene Vega arrived flanked by 2 FBI agents. She declared the case federal and not subject to corporate retrieval. Victor objected, but Vega raised a sealed affidavit. Hannah Moran had triggered a dead man switch before she died, forwarding encrypted medical logs to federal custody. Vivian's evidence completed the chain. The FBI moved on cue, issuing arrest warrants for Arthur Kingsley, Victor Hale, and Derek Pike. The press did not blink. They erupted. The Empire was no longer defending its power. It was collapsing in daylight. In the months that followed, Kingsley Biotech did not survive unchanged. It was gutted, audited, rebuilt under federal oversight, and forced to fund a victim's trust that bore Hannah Moran's name on every ledger. Vivian resigned from the board, not disgraced, but liberated. She stayed in Montana, living far from glass towers, working face-to-face with the families whose pain her evidence had finally brought into daylight. Daniel returned to service by choice, entering advanced paramedic training so the next life on the brink would not slip away unseen. Evan received a scholarship from the Restitution Fund, already sketching prototypes for medical equipment in his notebooks. When the new Community Health Wing opened, a bronze plaque greeted visitors at the entrance. Hannah Moran Center for Rural Care. Vivian stood beside Daniel as the ribbon was cut, not as a witness to loss, but to justice finished. This story is proof that truth can outrun power and that justice begins when silence ends. If this journey moved you, help us bring more hidden battles to light. Like, share, and subscribe to support stories that defend dignity, expose corruption, and honor those who fight back.